Hello everyone, this is Aussies Elect. We have like 3 days left until the federal election, and today I'm going to be doing a Senate prediction. It's been a couple of weeks since I last did one of these. We have a few little updates, but I want to go more into detail in this video about how and why certain parties can or cannot win seats in each particular state. We're going to get straight onto it with New South Wales. So here was the last election. The coalition got almost 37%, Labor just over 30%, the Greens 11.5%, One Nation 4%, United Australia 3.5%, Legalised Cannabis 2.6%, Animal Justice 2%, Liberal Democrats 2%, Shooters 2%. Labor Party actually got first on the ballot paper this time, which makes me think that they'll actually do at least a little bit better than last time. It's also predicted that there's going to be a bit of a swing towards the Labor Party in New South Wales. And if we look at the most recent Resolve Strategic poll, which is the most recent sort of statewide poll we have of federal voting intention, the Labor Party actually is equal on a dead heat with the coalition on first preferences, which is actually a pretty not so good result for the coalition. This result of 34, it's actually pretty poor for them. And if we look at some other polls that we've got from New South Wales, they haven't been too crash hot for the coalition either. We've had this recent Yougov poll where they're on 26. That's really bad, obviously. I don't think they'll get anything close to that low. The most recent news poll had them on 36, which isn't too great. The Yougov before that had them on 33, and the Results Strategic before that had them on 34 as well. So pretty lukewarm results for the coalition. One Nation has been doing okay. This Yougov poll had them on 10%. Latest Results Strategic had them on 7%, which is all right, I guess. What I've done for each of these states is that I've sort of made my own sort of guesses based on how I think things are going to sort of swing, based on polls, how much each party is going to get. And then also sort of I've got here like I've added up sort of the left parties and the right parties to sort of see if we're getting like a relatively accurate sort of result here. And I think this seems about right because it looks like Labor's going to get a little bit of a swing to it in New South Wales. And generally the left is going to get a bit of a swing to it in New South Wales. So Coalition on 34, Labor 32, Greens 12, One Nation 7.5, Legalised Cannabis 4.5. The Opportunities, no, I'm kidding. The Trumpeter Patriots on 2, Family First 2, Animal Justice 2, Libertarian 2, Jackie Lambie Network 1, Australia's Voice 1. In New South Wales, Libertarian Party is actually paired with Jared Rennick and Hart. It's this big open ticket, so that's why I'm thinking maybe they'll do a bit better because they've also got sort of the Jared Rennick name recognition there. They've lost the Liberal Democrats' name, so they've also sort of lost that confusion. But I think that sort of that joint ticket will maybe make up for it. The last time I did a Senate video, I was predicting that probably the coalition is going to win the third seat in New South Wales, just because it seems to have been very difficult for the status quo often to be broken in New South Wales, where we get 3 coalition, 2 Labor, and 1 Green. And I've no doubt that we're going to get 2 Labor, 1 Green, and 2 coalition. That last seat, though, is looking more and more dubious as time goes by. One Nation are polling like relatively well across the country. Some of those latest nationwide polls, they're doing really well. And statewide, they're also doing okay as well, as I showed you earlier. So I'm estimating they're going to get about 7.5. The amount of percentage that the coalition will have left over after achieving 2 quarters. 2 quarters is about 29%, so they'll have about 5% left over. So the One Nation Party will already be ahead of the coalition by, I'd say, about 2.5%. So it really just depends if they are able to sort of grab these like right-wing minor preferences before the coalition can. And there is sort of an idea that maybe there won't be as much preference discipline amongst these right-wing minor parties as the last election, because last election they all came together, they united as this freedom coalition over the whole COVID restrictions deal. And there's been sort of some infighting between, One Nation and Trumpeter Patriots, and even like Jared Rennick has been attacking One Nation because of the fact that they abstained over those hate speech legislation. So there might be a decent amount of these right-wing minor party voters who might put Family first, and then put the coalition before One Nation, or they might put Libertarian first and then put the coalition before One Nation, or they might put Trumpeter Patriots first and then put the coalition before One Nation. And that's how the coalition will be able to actually make up the 14.5% they'll need to get 3 seats. They already have about 5% of that. They need about 9% more. One Nation needs less, but it could be that they could attract less preferences from these right-wing minor parties. And then There's also going to be like a slight like Labour surplus as well. Some of that will be needed to get the Greens fully elected, and same as this legalized cannabis surplus as well. I don't really know if like Labour or legalized cannabis voters would put the coalition before One Nation or after, or they would just like both leave them blank and then they would just exhaust. I think the latter is probably more likely. I think it really just comes down to like who these voters here, not Animal Justice, but who the rest sort of preference first out of One Nation or coalition. And it's a really sort of a tough kind of call to make. I'm going to say if I'm going to be really bullish about One Nation this election, that One Nation actually have a very good chance of winning in New South Wales. Just because the coalition primary vote is sort of lacking and the One Nation primary vote is looking pretty good in New South Wales. So if we go back onto my map here, I'm just going to go all out and say One Nation is going to win a seat in New South Wales. That's going to be big, but I think it's absolutely possible this election. And, you know, the anti-immigration sentiment is high. So, and the coalition is floundering. So I can see it happening this election. Let's go on to Victoria. I'm just going to go straight onto my predictions here and then we'll sort of work backwards. So I got the coalition here on 34.5. It's slightly higher than New South Wales because it does seem to be a bit of movement unifying behind the coalition in Victoria. Brad Batten, the leader of the opposition in Victoria, is relatively popular as far as I know. And there's just such like Labor sentiment that a lot of people are just jumping straight over from Labor to the coalition. Labor still, I have them on 30%, but that's less than in New South Wales. Greens I have on a bit more in Victoria than New South Wales. One Nation on a bit less than in New South Wales, but still on 6, which is actually quite reasonable, I think. Victoria and Tasmania are always the weakest states for One Nation. To achieve like 6%, I think is pretty remarkable. Legalized cannabis I got here on 5. Opportunities, oh my god. Trumpet on 2.5. Family First 2. Libertarian 1.5, Animal Justice 1.5, Shooters, Fishers, Farmers 1.5, and Victorian Socialist on 1. And then I have like the left-right split, the same as in New South Wales, which is just sort of reflecting the fact that New South Wales is moving left, but Victoria is sort of moving right. I will show just a couple of poll data on this, just to sort of back up my claims here. So Victoria, the Labor Party primary vote is looking like, yeah, around about 30%. And the coalition primary vote is, on this news poll, it was up in 38, but all of the rest are showing like around about, 34, 35, that kind of thing. So I think that's closer to what they'll probably get in the Senate. This Resolve Strategic had them on 33, and was that any better than last time? It was a little bit down actually from their poll 2 weeks ago. So Redbridge did say that sort of Labor was coming back a little bit in Victoria. It doesn't really look like they're coming back, but maybe just like sort of the coalition is declining and the Greens are going up a little bit in Victoria, at least according to Resolve Strategic. So that pretty much checks out. Yeah, I think that probably the coalition getting 34.5% would actually be on the higher end of what they're probably going to get in Victoria. So we have a very similar situation here as in New South Wales on if the One Nation Party can collect these right-wing minor party preferences and beat the coalition. I think legalized cannabis preferences will matter a little bit more here because they're not needed to fulfill quotas for the Labor Party or the Greens. Look, both of them are over the quotas that they need. So legalized cannabis preferences could actually sort of decide who wins out of the coalition or One Nation. But legalized cannabis voters, I feel like they're very likely to exhaust their ballots. They'll just go like 1 to 6 on all these sort of like memey left-wing minor parties. They might vote Labor and the Greens, in which their vote will kind of go nowhere. But like, it's possible that these people just won't actually choose between the coalition and One Nation, and therefore it won't actually matter who they vote for. So some people have questioned whether or not legalized cannabis could actually win a seat themselves. I just don't think it's possible because it's just they're competing with a extra like 5.5% surplus of the coalition, 6% One Nation, and then all of these right-wing minor parties. Like we do have here the Socialists and like Animal Justice and stuff, which might help them a bit, and maybe some of the Labor excess surplus quota. But too much of an uphill battle against these right-wing minor parties. And then a right-wing minor party won the final seat last election when the left-right split was definitely higher on the left side. Like Labor won a two-party preferred of, I think, like 55-45. It's not looking like we're going to get something like that this election. There's probably going to be about a 2 or 3% swing against Labor on the two-party preferred. So I don't think the legalized cannabis, unfortunately, have much of a chance here. Fiona Patten will have to wait till next election. But it really is, again, between One Nation and the Coalition. The Coalition do have the fact that they're first on the ballot paper to help them this time, but they also had it last time and they still lost. But it does seem like there might be a bit of a jump on their primary vote for last election. So I'll just quickly show you what they got last election. So they got like 32.29, which is pretty low. So I think even if they don't get 34.5, they'll probably still get like a little bit of an increase on their primary vote, I'd say. So it's a really tough call whether if it's going to be the Coalition or One Nation winning that last seat. The Coalition, I think, have a better chance of doing so in Victoria than they do in New South Wales. But history has told us that it is possible for a right-wing minor party to win off of a very small percentage in Victoria. So I'm going to go for the meme, and I'm going to say that One Nation is going to win the last seat in Victoria, although I think this is even closer than New South Wales, and I would not be surprised if the last seat here goes to the Coalition. It really does feel like a toss-up. Like in New South Wales, I would say One Nation have like, I don't know, like 55% chance of winning this last. In here, it's like, I don't know, like a 51% chance. So it's really close. It's really close for this last seat in Victoria for One Nation. Let's just move on to Queensland, where the Coalition got like 35% last time, Labor 24.5%, Greens 12.5%, One Nation 7.5%. I'm expected the Coalition to maybe do a little bit better, Labor to do also a little bit better, and the Greens to also do a little bit better, but then also One Nation to do a little bit better. And legalized cannabis to do better, and Rennick. I feel like probably the Coalition really always does not quite as well in the Senate as it polls in Queensland, just because there's so many sort of right-wing minor parties always in Queensland sort of cramping their style. Like if we look at opinion polls in Queensland, Coalition's getting like 36, 37, 40, 41. Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to get up to like the 40s in the Senate. Like maybe in the House they could get something like that, but in the Senate, yeah, they're not going to get that high. So I think maybe even like 36.5 is probably too much for them. But Labor, yeah, they tend to get a bit closer to what they get in these polls, I think, because there's not as many alternatives. So yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable to expect that they'll get about 10% less than the Coalition. But I do think there's probably going to be a slight swing towards Labor in Queensland. It sounds weird to say that. I just get the impression of like, those Queenslanders really hating on Albo, but the polls are pointing to there being a slight swing to the Labor Party in Queensland. I just think Labor's probably going to have either a status quo result or they're going to improve slightly, which means that Labor should be able to get 2 seats, and I think the Greens will actually do slightly better, and they'll get 1 seat. I know I'm going all over the place, but I want to just go back to this resolve for Queensland. The Greens are doing really well here, 15%. Labor Party like almost have like sort of 2 quotas on their own according to this. But yeah, 36%. It's not enough to really get 3 quotas, I think. And as I said, all these right-wing minor parties cramping their style. And I have in Queensland Joe Rennick getting about 4%. It's really the most that I can give him because he's just competing with like libertarians, the Opportunities Party. Fuck, the Trumpeter Patriots. I did that intentionally the first time, and every other time I'm like accidentally doing that. And then they've also got like Family First. I'm giving them about 7.5% surplus after they get 2 Senate seats. One Nation is, again, slightly higher than that. I think Rennick preferences, just because he's so grumpy at the Coalition after they basically dumped him, I think probably those Rennick preferences are way more likely to go to One Nation than to the Coalition. And I think that's also the case with, some of these other right-wing minor party preferences too. Just especially in Queensland. I think they all just love teaming up in Queensland, all these right-wing minor parties. So even if they sort of fight sometimes. And then legalized cannabis, again, like they polled quite highly last election, and I'm giving them like 5.5% here. The problem again is just that the Greens and the Labor still need some votes to make up quotas of their own to get seats of their own. They'll be taking some of these like left-wing minor party preferences for themselves, and then legalized cannabis will kind of be left with only 5.5%, and they can't sort of attract a lot of these right-wing minor parties. So that's why, again, legalized cannabis won't have much of a chance here until somebody like increases the size of the Senate. And even then, they'll be like competing with the likes of Jared Rennick and stuff. But anyway, so once again, it's a competition between One Nation and the Coalition, and Queensland, it seems to be that when there is this competition, One Nation always seems to win. So again, I'm giving that last seat to One Nation, and then the Coalition will win 2. So let's move forward to WA. So the first thing I want to talk about with WA is that for this result strategic, we have this very odd result for the rest of Australia, which has the Coalition on 36, Labor on 33, Greens on 14, and One Nation only on 6. And then if we go to their last poll, One Nation is on the same, but the Coalition were on 28. So it's these independent voters where after they've asked them to make a choice on who they're voting for first, when they've realized that an independent isn't actually running in their seat, they've basically just jumped over to the Coalition. They increased by 8% in 2 weeks, which is remarkable. And it's way higher of a percentage of a primary vote that I would expect for the Coalition in the rest of Australia. I don't know if this is also including the Northern Territory. The Northern Territory will probably bump them up a little bit. But in the ACT, WA, SA, and Tasmania, they're not getting like sort of 36%. I'll show you exactly what I mean. WA, I've got them on 30%. SA, I've got them on 29%. And Tasmania, I've got them on 29%. In Western Australia, maybe they're including the WA Nationals in that, which make a little bit more sense. And maybe it includes like the SA Nationals as well. I'm not really sure, but that just seems like an absurdly high number, 36, which makes me think that maybe the Coalition might do a little bit better in these states than what I'm expecting. But in WA, the Coalition, apart from that, have been like polling like Yougov 28, Newspoll 34, Yougov 27, Yougov 29, Yougov 36. This Newspoll had them on 34. Again, I don't know if this is including the WA Nationals or not. One would assume not, because they're not part of the Coalition. Anyway, but it actually doesn't really matter for WA, because I don't expect that the Coalition is going to be able to win 3 seats, regardless if they got like 30 or 33 or something like that. I don't think they're going to win 3 Senate seats here. They didn't win it last time. I think the battle is absolutely between Labor and One Nation. I have Labor here on 35, which is about what they got last time. So I think it might be actually slightly more. And then One Nation up to 9%. They weren't polling very well in WA earlier in the term, but just in the last couple of months, One Nation have really just shot up in WA, and they've absolutely become competitive. Again, we have legalized cannabis here 4, and then we have the WA Nats down here on 3.5. I mentioned in some of my earlier videos that I thought maybe the WA Nationals were competitive, but I just think they probably spent all their money on the state election and they're not really focusing too much on this federal election. It's hard to tell because they're not appearing in any of the polls. I don't know if these pollsters are sort of just putting them in with the Liberals here. I really should just rename this to Liberal, really, shouldn't I? Maybe if like Nationals do better, they have more of a chance, but for here, I really do think it's between Labor and One Nation. Here's actually where legalized cannabis preferences might come in handy, but it only even, again, if legalized cannabis voters actually even preference the Labor Party at all in their like top 6 or top however number they write. They can't write 420. There's not that many candidates, unfortunately. Labor have like a surplus of like about 6%. One Nation have a surplus of 9. And then again, we have like these right-wing minor parties like the WA Nats, the Christians, Trumpeter Patriots, Libertarian, Great Australian. Let's take a look at the results from last election and sort of try to work out what sort of went on which enabled Labor to actually win in WA. So they had about a 5.5% surplus, and then One Nation were only on 3.5% in this election. Obviously expect them to do much better this time. Legalized cannabis here on 3.5%, and then a bunch of sort of right-wing minor parties here, like all in a line. Oh my god, there's like 5 of them. Wow. WA, I think, was generally pretty supportive of like the COVID restrictions. I don't think they had any lockdowns actually. So maybe that freedom movement wasn't as sort of strong in WA, and that affected maybe the preference discipline. And that meant that maybe some of these like right-wing minor parties ended up like leaking more to the Labor Party instead of, say, going to One Nation, having them have a possibility of actually beating out Labor. Also, the WA Nats were not running in the Senate last election, interestingly enough. So I think Labor were able to win off, again, preference leakage, legalized cannabis preferences probably, And then you also got like sort of Animal Justice and some other sort of left-wing minor parties down here. The difference will be the Libs, I think, will probably be on a similar amount. They could be slightly higher or slightly lower. One Nation will be on much higher, probably like 5% higher than last election. And then if there is quite a big anti-immigration sentiment in WA, I don't think it is as big in some of the other states, though, just from my sort of the vibes I get. But if there is an anti-immigration sentiment, there has to be, because the One Nation primary vote is up. But what they really need is these right-wing minor parties to preference One Nation over Labor. And it's hard to tell if that's going to happen. One Nation did manage to win a extra upper house seat off like 0.4% of a quota in the state election. So that's actually spells pretty good for them. It's just a really hard call to make on who's actually going to beat who. The two-party preferred in WA is looking to be around about the same as it was last election. Maybe a slight swing away from Labor, but it really depends on what poll you look at. Just going just on who has the higher sort of primary vote, like as in surplus versus primary vote, I'd give it to One Nation, just for the sake of fulfilling the meme and thinking that One Nation are going to really do really well this election. I'm going to give it to them. But before we move on, I just want to examine the option of legalized cannabis quickly, because I think they do have a better chance here than in some of the other states because of the fact that there is so much of a Labor surplus. So let's say theoretically that Animal Justice or like some of the left-wing minor parties that I don't actually have down here preference legalized cannabis over Labor, and let's say the Labor primary vote isn't quite this high. Maybe say the Labor primary vote is only like, I don't know, 33 or something, or 34. Maybe legalized cannabis is higher than 4. So if these left-wing minor parties help legalized cannabis to outpoll Labor and Labor actually gets eliminated from the count, or even if there's the Greens poll higher than 12 and then they have a surplus and that goes to legalized cannabis could topple over Labor and then Labor get eliminated, and the Labor surplus helps legalize cannabis to get up to, I don't know, something like 8%. And then somehow they win a bunch of like other preferences. It seems very difficult. It seems like not really credible that it's going to happen, just simply because there's just so many right-wing minor parties. And you would think that they probably wouldn't go anywhere near legalized cannabis. They'd probably just go straight to the sort of One Nation. So I think Labor has a better chance than legalized cannabis, not only because their surplus is higher, but also because Labor have a pretty decent reputation in WA, and it's more likely that some of these right-wing minor parties actually possibly might preference Labor over One Nation. I don't see it being sort of the same as legalized cannabis. Just a quick editor's note. While I was editing, this poll was released by Spectre Strategy, and it has these state breakdowns. Kevin Bonham seems to not trust this poll too much, but it does have an interesting result of the Greens getting 17% in WA. And I did see in the latest News Poll Quarterly that the Greens seemingly doing all right in WA. So maybe this Greens surplus you've got here might also help the Labor Party in WA. According to this, Labor's doing the best in WA out of any other state. So One Nation only on 7%, which is actually the worst in the country. As much as I'd like to give it to One Nation for the meme, maybe really the most likely outcome is a Labor victory, at least according to these polls. But yeah, One Nation still have a chance. Let's talk about South Australia. So South Australia tends to have a pretty crummy primary vote for the major parties. South Australia really does like voting for sort of third parties, it seems. Liberals only got like 34% last time, Labor only like 32 and a bit. Labor's polling pretty well in South Australia. There was this one sort of rogue Yougov poll which had them on 45%, which is ridiculous. But again, I must refer to this Resolve Strategic with a coalition on 36 in the rest of Australia. So them doing as badly as, see, we got here 21% on this YouGov or 24%. It definitely doesn't bode well for them, but I don't think it's going to be that bad. I've predicted that they are going to get like 29%, which is probably on the high end for them, to be honest, but I'm trying to be not too weird with how badly the Liberal Party is going to do in SA. I know the brand is not very crash hot at the moment. And then I have Labor doing, I think, slightly better than last time. They might do a lot better, honestly. But the news poll is not predicting that they're going to get a really high primary vote. It's only really the latest YouGovs that are suggesting Labor's going to do like extremely well in South Australia. But what we've also seen is, according to the polls, is that One Nation is doing pretty well in South Australia. We got 15% on this latest YouGov. We got 16% on the one before that. And then this news poll has One Nation on 9%, which has been pretty consistent throughout the term in news poll of pretty high primary votes. There was a couple where they didn't do amazingly, like there's this one news poll in December last year, and then there was one in the previous December where they only got 6%. So it does vary, but it looks like One Nation will probably get around 10%, which is basically the highest in the nation. Labor's primary vote is sort of like, it could be really high or it could be slightly lower than in WA. One Nation's high. Liberals are not going anywhere. We've got like the Jackie Lambie network. Is it possible for them to get over One Nation? So there is the added benefit of this high Labor quota. I don't think Labor are going to get 3 seats, but they could get eliminated and then help the Jackie Lambie network. Rex Patrick's running to as well as the legalized cannabis party, assuming that like Jackie Lambie network somehow beats out the Labor Party itself. But these 3 combined numbers, 4.5 plus 4, and that's 8.5, and then Labor, another 5, 13.5. That's like almost an upper quota if we get like 100% preference discipline, which isn't going to happen, of course. And then again, we have these right-wing minor parties, Libertarian, Family First, Trumpet Patriots, SA Nats. It really does feel like a freeway contest. It's like Labor, Rex Patrick, One Nation. I just don't think enough people are going to preference the Jackie Lambie network in their 6 preferences or however how many they do to sort of overcome this massive primary vote of One Nation. I think you'll get some people who preference Labor and then they preference One Nation, and then some people who preference Labor and then preference Jackie Lambie, or some people who preference Labor and then preference legalized cannabis and then they leave the rest of their ballot blank. And then we also have the Greens to worry about. This is a pretty high estimate actually for how the Greens are probably going to do in SA. They're not polling tremendously well in SA. The Greens are going to need also help in order to actually win their seat, which they'll probably take votes off of like legalized cannabis. Again, I'm thinking One Nation probably has the best chance in SA. Rex Patrick of the Jackie Lambie network, there's definitely sort of an outside chance here. Labor's polling like 2-party vote 55-45. Maybe there's a bigger sort of left faction in SA than I'm expecting. And don't forget that the Jackie Lambie network does sort of attract preferences from both the left and the right, better than someone like legalized cannabis could, in my opinion. Yeah, this last seat is very difficult to call. But again, for the meme, I'm going to say that we're going to have 2 Labor, 1 Green, 2 Coalition, and 1 Nation, which puts them up to 6. Finally, we go down to Tasmania, where we don't really have any polling for Tasmania. So I've just sort of had to make a guess based on last election votes and also sort of the vibe I'm getting. So I think that the Liberals will probably be down a little bit. They did really well last election. I don't think Tasmanians are that keen on Peter Dutton, from what I can tell. And there's also sort of like the state drag as well. Labor, about the same as last time, I think. Greens will be up, I think. They did almost get 16% last time. That opposition salmon farming probably will help them there. Lambie, maybe this is a bit too high for her because she almost got this last time, but she is running herself as opposed to her surrogate. But her party has had some issues, and I think she will get some votes harvested from her from One Nation. Lee Hansen, Pauline Hansen's daughter, I'm expecting maybe she'll get around 6%, which is pretty high for Tasmania. Again, I think there's anti-immigration sentiment everywhere. I mean, I think it's probably lower in Tasmania because they have less immigrants, but yeah, I think One Nation will do all right. And then again, legalized cannabis 4, and then some of these sort of right-wing minor parties I don't think will do quite as well in Tasmania. And then I've got like the left-right split pretty high left and right, but that's what Tasmania is kind of like, so that's what you would expect. I guess the main difference is with Tasmania is that here we have the Lambie network with a higher primary vote than One Nation. We have the Labor with a tad bit of a surplus, and then the Greens also with a tad bit of a surplus. Greens are just over 1 quota, Labor just over 2 quotas. And then we also have the legalized cannabis party. And that combined also with the fact that Lambie does sort of attract votes from both the left and the right. I don't think Lambie has too much of an issue here. I think that Lambie probably will get re-elected, but she will, in my opinion, get a run for her money probably with One Nation. I'm just expecting the name recognition will help One Nation a little bit here, but I don't think that they'll be able to get a seat. I think it's just going to remain a status quo result here, and yeah, it would be a really big upset if Jackie Lambie fails to win a seat in Tasmania, because she is like the least unpopular politician in the country at the moment. So I'm not going to dwell too much on these territories, because my very last video I uploaded literally like 2 days ago. We went kind of over this, but I'll briefly talk about it. So the Liberals are going to do quite badly in ACT. I think they're going to get under 20%. I think that it's almost a certainty at the moment that David Pocock is going to outpoll them, and he could even outpoll Labor at this point. I think they'll get pretty similar primary votes. But yeah, it's going to be Labor and David Pocock getting elected there in the ACT. And then as for Northern Territory, the Libertarians won't be able to capitalize on a similar performance as they did with the Liberal Democrats last election. So I think some of that vote will return back to the country Libs, and it's just going to be a typical Labor coalition, even split there. Nothing remarkable. This is my Senate prediction. It's a really amazing result for One Nation. I think that the media will start to talk about how the far right is on the rise in Australia, of course. And it does get a pretty interesting result where Labor almost have enough senators to pass legislation without the Greens. So 26 plus 6 is 32, 33, 34, 38. They're one senator away for not needing the Greens at all to pass anything. I mean, they do need Lydia Thorpe. So, wow. But yeah, it gets very close to not needing the Greens. And if there is some like really shock result, like say Labor wins 3 seats in SA and the Greens don't win any, then we do actually have a situation where the Labor Party can pass legislation without the Greens. I think this is probably pretty unlikely. I think the Greens at this point are winning a seat in each state until the end of time. So yeah, big block here for One Nation. But with the Greens, Labor Party can easily pass anything they like, really. They only need 2 senators from anywhere else, and that's all they need. And yeah, it's a terrible Senate for the coalition, but they're not going to be in government, in my opinion, so it won't actually matter. There's 4 seats I'm quite uncertain about this election in the Senate. That's in WA, this last seat could go to Labor. In SA, this last seat could go to Rex Patrick. In New South Wales, this last seat could go to the coalition. And in Victoria, this last seat could go to the coalition. But I do think One Nation are the slight favourites in all 4 of these. Queensland, unless like the coalition gets a really good result and they are somehow able to get that last seat. I mean, there's also slim chance that Rennick could get that last seat, as opposed to like the coalition. Would be a huge upset, and all the right-wing Freedom Party people will be like dancing in the street, even if the Labor Party scrapes into minority government in the lower house. It would still mean like a relatively decent Senate for Labor, though, you know, like it's still not that bad for them, but it would definitely send the message. Anyway, this video is very long. It's very nerdy, very statistical. I'm going to do a final prediction on like Friday night, Saturday morning, and that will also include a Senate prediction as well. It won't be as in-depth as this, but I'll probably just sort of back up or retract on all of the sort of claims or stuff that I made on this video. We might not get another Yougov MRP that was promised to us, but we will get a final state-by-state breakdown from Yougov on Friday. It's usually a bit sketchy, but it does tell us a little bit about how things are going, I think. And maybe they'll have a higher sample size because it is the last poll and it might be a bit more accurate. So yeah, after Friday, I will do another quick prediction. But for now, I'm thinking One Nation are going to do really well. Maybe they won't win a Senate seat in every state, but they do have a good chance to pick up not only just that last Senate seat in Queensland, but also a Senate seat in every other mainland state. So thanks for watching, everyone. Goodbye.